So hey everyone, it's Jamie here from Yoga for AS, and we've got a really exciting video today, exciting interview with Lettie Bishop and Matthew Roberts, who are both from Loughborough University and have been doing a very exciting piece of research that came out fairly recently, and it really relates to anyone watching this with axial spondyloarthritis, and it's a really awesome opportunity to sit down with both Lettie and Matthew to dive deeper into this research, but also talk about how it can really perhaps make an impact in people's lives on a daily basis. So bringing the research from the kind of the paper to the people, which is, I think, always really important. So Lettie and Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself and we'll go from there?
Yeah, I'll go first. And hi, I'm Lettie. I'm a professor at Loughborough University, so I do research and I also teach our students. And the main thing that we look at with our research is looking at how we can use exercise to tone down or dampen down inflammation. So that's what we do.
Hi, I'm Matthew Roberts. I'm a researcher here at Loughborough University, funded by the Leicester Biomedical Research Centre, and I work closely with Lettie on research projects. My background is I did a PhD in cardiovascular disease and diabetes across different ethnicities. But since then, so kind of from 2020 onwards, I've worked more closely with Lettie, looking at the reasons on why populations become inflamed and also the benefits of doing exercise to reduce inflammation. And recently we conducted a study in patients with AS.
Awesome, thanks both. So let's kind of kick it off and start talking about this study then. And what would be great to hear from you both is what made you want to do this study, and then the process of carrying out the research, and then importantly for everyone watching, what you found, and then we can talk about the kind of details of that.
I'll explain a bit with the background then, and then Matt, you can talk a bit more about the actual study itself, if that works. Yeah. So the study came about because there was one of the fantastic doctors that works with patients' axial spines, sadly no longer with us, Dr. Andrew Keat, and he invited me to give a talk at a conference to clinicians and scientists who work with axial SpA. And after I'd done that talk, one of the clinicians, one of the consultants, Dr. Morthy, who works at Leicester, came up to me afterwards, and we got chatting about what we might be able to do. And Dr. Keat, Andrew Keat, was a real champion of this work and helped us secure a little bit of funding from NAS. And we managed to do this pilot study, like an early exploratory study, looking at, rather than looking at just stretching exercises, moving away from that and trying to incorporate walking a little bit more and see if that was even possible, because obviously with the fatigue and with the pain that many patients suffer, it might not even have been something that people could tolerate. So we wanted to see if it was, first of all, even possible. And if it was possible, we wanted to see if it could tone down or dampen down some of the inflammation, which underlies many of the problems and the comorbidities or the associated problems that people have with axial SpA. And the reason we wanted to do that, because I'd spent a long time working with another clinical population, people with chronic kidney disease, and they also have a lot of inflammation, a lot of chronic inflammation. We knew that walking could help dampen down things in that population. They are also, they're getting terrible fatigue as well. So there were some links there, and we thought, well, can we translate this into axial SpA? Because it did certainly seem that there was a gap there, and we might be able to help. So that's where the background came from. And then I was very lucky enough to get the funding to have Matt work with us. And Matt has been absolutely brilliant. He essentially ran the trial, which we ran from University Hospitals in Leicester. So I'll let you have a chat now, Matt, and explain what we did.
Yeah, so as Lettie mentioned, we knew from other populations that essentially they've got this chronic inflammatory profile, but exercise can actually dampen it down. And importantly, with other populations, it's just doing something is better than nothing. So if you look at it and just look at it in terms of physical activity levels and chronic inflammation, the biggest benefits are seen in those that just do something compared to nothing. So translating this across into people with AS, you know that this is a chronic inflammatory disease, but actually other studies hadn't really investigated the underpinning profile of what's going on with exercise. We knew from other studies in questionnaire data, for example, that exercise was improving things like disease activity index through the BASDI form and functional index. But we don't exactly know how it was improving it. So this study was a proof of concept study, really small study due to funding and things like this, just to investigate, is there something going on that's underpinning these improvements of exercise? So what we did is we teamed up with the University Hospitals of Leicester with Dr. Morthy and recruited 20 participants in total. 10 were in a control group and 10 were in an exercise group. And importantly, all of these people that we recruited were already taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug treatment. They weren't on biologic medication, because that's more progressed. And that's something that we'll look to do in the future. But they were all taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug treatment. Now, when they came into Morpheus clinics, we screened them just to make sure that they weren't too active to begin with. Because obviously, if someone's too active, they won't really see the benefits of doing an exercise program on top of that. So we screened these individuals, and then they came to the visit, the first lab visit at Loughborough, and we took their height, weight, and general anthropometric data, baseline questionnaire data to look at disease activity, etc., and a few functional tests, and then also took blood markers to look at immune profiles. At the end of that visit, they were then randomly assigned into a control group or an exercise group, and the control group were just told to carry on as normal, and the exercise group were asked to walk for 30 minutes, 5 times a week, at a subjective rating of somewhat hard. And that was established from the first visit because they walked on a treadmill there, and we took their heart rate, etc., and determined what was somewhat hard for that individual.
And they got to experience it then, didn't they, Matt? So they knew
exactly, yeah.
They knew what it felt like, what activity we wanted people to do. So it's kind of like a brisk walk. We didn't want anyone to feel too out of breath, but certainly be able to keep a conversation, not be running, not be jogging, but a brisk walk.
Yeah. So then those individuals on the exercise group left with an activity monitor and also an exercise diary. Importantly, the control group were not given the activity monitor at the end of the study, because you can imagine if you get given a new shiny monitor, you might up your activity. So the exercise group went away with that and were asked to do this 150 minutes across the week. Now, we weren't expecting a good retention in the study because it was across 12 weeks. Each person came back every 4 weeks. And we didn't really know if these people could do walking without bringing on flare-ups and things like this. But actually, there was a 0% dropout in the study, which shows that walking was feasible and actually really well tolerated by people. And we'll talk about the results later on if you want to as well. But actually, we saw really good response in terms of their immune and inflammatory profiles, showing the benefits of walking as well. So that's kind of an overview of the study. Delve down more into it. But it was a really good study, 20 people in total, a 0% dropout. And it was really good feedback as well in terms of the participants, providing feedback on even just the mental health benefits of getting out and exercising. And although I say it's 30 minutes, 5 times a week, the participants could also break it up. So they could do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and just try and accumulate that exercise as well.
Yeah,
so
I think that's really important, isn't it? Because I think what we're trying to do is, as we've talked about before, there's science and research, and there's like an ideal that we know in the lab works, but then there's also making sure that what we've really got to do is make sure that the science that we do is adaptable and fits into people's lives. And everyone's busy and everyone's got competing things on there for their time, as well as having the challenges of having AS. So we know that this sort of exercise, you can break it up into, you can do 3 lots of 10 minutes and things. So it's absolutely the idea is to make it really adaptable, and so that it can actually be flexible and fit into people's lives, so that people can already access it. It makes it a little bit easier to actually even do, because otherwise being told you've got to suddenly start doing 30 minutes on most days of the week just sounds horrendous. How the hell are you ever going to fit that in? So we've got to try and make these things doable, because they're never going to have any benefit if people don't do them or can't do them.
Yeah, so a good example of that is one of the participants worked in London.
Yeah.
And he would just get off the tube at 1 stop earlier and just walk instead.
Yeah.
And that's how he got it into his weekly routine.
And we did say as well that people could do it if they had because some people had exercise things at home and could potentially use, but no one did that, did they? Everyone actually did do it outside, and we were a bit concerned because for some people it went over the winter, but people were doing it and they were happy to do it. And one of the biggest things, I think, from our point of view, was the positive feedback that we got, because taking a pill doesn't get you outside, doesn't get the mental health benefits. And that was one of the biggest things. And it wasn't something we were really looking at too much, but it was a lot of the feedback was about that, was about how getting outside just made people feel better. And you could do it with other people. You didn't have to do it on your own. And that was really big. And I think that was something that struck both of us, wasn't it, Matt, when the feedback we got from the exercise group, and the point where the control group were a bit gutted that they were randomized to the control group, which is why they all got exercise monitors at the end, so that we could try and encourage them to do what they hadn't been able to do for the previous 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Matt, should we say about, I think it probably makes sense now if we actually say a little bit more about the inflammation markers. So what we actually looked at was various markers of inflammation. We looked at immune cells that we know contribute to the inflammation that underpins axial spondyloarthritis. And what we wanted to do, without going into great scientific detail, we wanted to see if those types of immune cells changed what they were able to produce and change how many of those they had. And we did actually see a decrease in the most inflammatory cells. We saw a decrease in the numbers of those after the 12-week program in the exercise group, which was absolutely fantastic to see.
And it was about an 8% reduction as well, which doesn't sound like a lot in percentage terms, no. but this is a percentage of a type of immune cell, and of them immune cells, you've got hundreds of thousands or millions. So actually, an 8% drop in terms of absolute numbers is a big drop in the amount of cells. And if you've got a big drop in that amount of cells, you've got less producing these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which they're called, but they go around the body causing inflammation. So if you can cut off the source of that inflammation, you can reduce the symptoms.
And what's really important is that married up with a decrease in reported spinal pain.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, and this was such a small study, we didn't actually expect to be able to have any definitive findings, yet we did, and that was fantastic to see.
Yeah, and the real benefit of this study is about 2-3 years ago, I reviewed the literature, and only a handful of exercise studies had looked at inflammation, but of them ones that had looked at inflammation, the majority had only looked at CRP. Now, the problem with CRP, which I'm guessing a lot of the patients will have heard of because it's routinely done in GPs, the problem is it moves around a lot. It fluctuates a lot on a day-to-day basis. So depending on when the person comes into the lab, they might have really high CRP concentrations or really low CRP concentrations. And that's one of the key criticisms. I've heard it, I went for an MRI scan, but I was actually feeling okay that day. So I'm a bit gutted because I didn't have a flare-up that day, didn't pick it up. So that's the problem with CRP concentrations, etc. But what we're looking at is the underpinning cause of their inflammatory markers, which is the immune cells. And no other studies have done that. So that's really the benefit of this study, looking at the source of the inflammation rather than actually looking at what's going on just at the superficial level.
Yeah, because if we can identify the cause, like what's actually happening, what's making things worse, and then we know the sorts of exercise you can do specifically to lower those, then we can help give evidence to support recommendations that are specific to a particular problem that people are having. And that's the problem at the moment, I think, with axial spondylitis. There's not enough research into the different types of exercise, and it's all focused on mainly on helping with mobility, flexibility, and helping reduce pain. But beyond that, it's not really being examined. And I think everyone's axial spondylitis is personal to them. And I think what we need to do is almost get to a stage where we've got a menu of choices, and depending on your symptoms and your needs and what you actually want, you can choose different types of exercise, and we'll have the evidence to support those benefits. I mean, that's ultimately what we want to do, but this is certainly a fantastic start for us, and we're really, really encouraged. And what we want to do now is move it into patients who are on the biologics, which is our next stage. If we, because we've got such fantastic tolerability to this, like the patients on NSAIDs were absolutely fine. It was tolerable. No one had any flares. It was really, really encouraging that we can now take it to the patients who are on biologics and see if it can also be similarly beneficial to them.
That's amazing. And thank you both for sharing all of that and kind of detailing the results. And I think you make a really important point about the C-reactive protein, because again, most people with axial SPA will get that test and find that it comes back very low, but they're still feeling really inflamed. And of course, as you're kind of pointing to, that's not just the only way to measure inflammation. And I think hopefully in the long term, there will be more measures of inflammatory markers as a standard for when people go and have their bloods done. But
I think that's so important, because I think the problem is it's because CRP is done as a standard routine offered test in hospitals and clinical, that's the all clinical pathology set up to do CRP. It's just easy, it's an easy marker to do, but it's non-specific. It's so, you know, on its own, it doesn't really tell you much.
Yeah. And not to go too deep into the science, but what were the ones you looked at, if you could just mention the names, because I guess then people who are interested can go and look into those if they wanted to, because we do have the nerd in me does like to know these things, and I'm sure there will be others out there. But
go on then, Matt, you can list them.
Yeah. So in terms of the immune cells, we looked at different monocytes. So there's different subsets, but in terms of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6, which you may have heard of, TNF alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, they're the two big ones that we look at. But importantly, it's those subsets of the monocytes, the intermediates and non-classicals, if people want to look into them, they're the major producers of IL-6 and TNF alpha. So what we showed in the study was that the proportion of the non-classicals, which are really the pro-inflammatory monocytes, they came down.
And they're the ones that produce those cytokines.
Yeah, they're the ones which produce the IL-6, etc. So if you can cut off the source, you get the reduction in the pro-inflammatory cytokines going around the body.
That's very interesting, because not to go too much on biologics, because I know that's something for future research, but biologics do influence things like TNF alpha, don't they? So the idea that the results you found were cutting off the source that was providing that inflammation for TNF alpha and the other inflammatory proteins, that's super interesting, isn't it? So yeah, cool. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it's also always important as well to remember these people were already on anti-inflammatory drugs. So the benefits of the exercise was on top of the benefits that they're already getting from the medication. So it's always important to stress that as well.
Yeah, so it's almost like exercise is a supplement. It's probably the best way of thinking of it, is exercise is a supplement. It's never going to replace the medication, especially when the biologics were under no illusions it's ever going to replace the anti-IL-17s and anti-TNF. But what we're hoping it can do is supplement and help them work better, and also provide aspects of anti-inflammatory consequences that the pills can't give, by getting people to exercise and having the dual benefit of the physical and the mental, which I think is so important. And almost we found with patients in other groups that when they take on some sort of exercise, knowing that it will supplement their medication, it's this idea that you're taking ownership and you're actively involved in your management, more so than obviously just taking your medication. And I think that's actually quite a powerful thing.
Yeah,
absolutely. So the key takeaways that I've gotten from this is, one, you gave this kind of ideal of what to aim for each week, which was 150 minutes, right? But that doesn't have to be in 30-minute sessions. It can be broken up. And the other thing is, we're not talking very intense activity. We're talking fairly light activity, enough to still be able to hold a conversation and not be too breathless. And then on top of that, the benefits go beyond exercise, which is the community and being able to influence things like our mental health, which has an influence on our stress, and our stress levels have an influence on inflammation. So I guess it's helping to break another cycle there as well. I think the community that, Yoga Freyes has, and a lot of the students that have come to our sessions over a long period of time, come back with less inflammation in the blood. They have improved scores on their BASDAI and other assessments. But the thing that really, I think, helps is the idea of not trying to do too much. And I think that's probably the biggest issue that lies for people with axial spondyloarthritis, that's why we started Yoga for AS, is you're diagnosed. One of the first things you're told is keep moving and start exercising. Well, exercise that's usually the standard is quite intense. If you signed up for your local exercise class, 90% possibility, unless you really are looking for a certain one, it's going to be too much and it might cause a flare. That can go for Pilates, that can go for any type of strength and conditioning, that can go for yoga.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's super important to make sure when people are starting, it's really accessible and it is done at a level that's appropriate, because I'm presuming you weren't asking people to all walk at the same speed and walk. It was their own personal subjective level of intensity, which was enough to feel like they're working, but not too much that they were overexerted. So personalized exercise, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so important, because the other thing is that if you do something and it's really horrible and it feels horrible, you're not going to do it again. You've got to make it manageable. And even if it starts off those first couple of weeks, you don't make the full 150 minutes, it didn't matter. Just doing something is better than nothing. And once you have that confidence that it's okay, it's not going to make anything any worse, then you don't know, then things will just get better and you don't know where it's going to lead. But a lot of this is about having the confidence that you can do it. It's not horrible and it's not going to make anything worse. And I think that's probably the biggest hurdle to get over.
And I think for those watching this who, let's say, for example, they're in a flare of their sacroiliac joints and they're dealing with sacroiliitis, walking can be really painful. But when that settles down, what interestingly you've shown here is walking can be tolerated by, a diverse group of people. But when people are still dealing with quite a lot of pain in their SI joints, any type of activity that would still be similar to walking, whether that be some strength type training, some things like swimming, things like cycling, but also activities that involve isometric exercise, right? So obviously we teach yoga, but also we teach strength training and strength and conditioning with our classes as well. A lot of that is isometric exercise where there isn't much walking involved. You're holding a position in, complete freeze frame, but you're still getting the heart rate up. You're still a little bit out of breath. That's the same transferable thing. So of course, walking is what's being studied, but it doesn't just, what your research has found, you can correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that walking is the way to reduce inflammation. It's that light intensity exercise where people are feeling like they're working subjectively to their own level has helped a bunch of people reduce inflammation. And that's, I think, a really powerful thing to have kind of uncovered. And it's exciting to see what will happen next with that.
I mean, I think from our point of view, it's so encouraging from a changing clinical guidance and recommendations. We need to show it in each of these different activities. But you're absolutely right, Jamie, that it has the key point is having that exercise stimulus. And if you can get that, then that's the benefits. But there's certainly, I mean, if you're having a flare, you shouldn't be, don't be, doing these sorts of exercises, of course. But then that's the key point, is that it's definitely translatable. And that's one thing that, like I was saying about having a menu of things that you can do. I think that's what we need to do. What we need to do, unfortunately, in the scientific world, before anyone will give recommendations clinically, we have to show it in many, many studies. And unfortunately, we're at the early stages, but at least we're doing it. And at least we're getting somewhere. And that's the main thing. And as I said, we've got a new PhD student who's starting working. So we're going to have quite a few studies now that we can do. We've got a bit of momentum going finally, which is fantastic.
Yeah. It's also replication across them, but also to increase the sample size, because this was only 20 people, 10 people exercising. So that's one of the limitations of the study, is it's relatively small. If you can show that in a much larger sample size,
Yeah, so
in
the
our
study in
clinical employment
biologics that we're proposing is going to be over 40 people, and we're just trying to scale it up. Each time we do something, we'll try and scale it up a bit more.
Yeah, which is, really important to, get a bigger sample size, but also I think looking at population who are also taking biologics will be really helpful because, there are quite a high number of people who both do take biologics with this condition. And I think there is probably a subset of population who take biologics and know how important it is to also exercise. But there are also people who take the biologics, feel a positive effect from it, but think that that's the ceiling, that they've hit the ceiling of how good they could feel. But they don't know that through other lifestyle management on top of their medication, they could go through to a higher ceiling, which I think is really important. And having that as part of someone's day-to-day could make a massive difference. So if people brought out an enhanced biologic, people would want to take it, right? So
Absolutely.
the equivalent would be that alongside exercise. And I think the other thing to say on, exercise does of course go beyond just the physical, and depends of course what type of movement you're doing. Obviously when we're teaching yoga, we're not really seeing it as exercise, it's a movement practice. But even when you look at the lens of exercise, even walking, you're going out in nature. If you're doing something in a community, you feel less isolated, and when you feel less isolated, you feel less stressed. And I think it's super important to try and establish a sense of community and doing something together. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting piece of research, and hopefully people watching have gotten a good takeaway from this, which is you don't have to do much. It can be personalized to you. You're not having to compete with anyone, and just doing a small amount each day and spreading it across the days of the week can make a difference.
And the other thing I suppose I add as well is obviously our main things we wanted to see was that symptom burden went down and this underlying inflammation. But in looking at the bigger picture, one of the things we want to look at is things like heart disease risk and other conditions that are associated with long-term chronic inflammation. So that's another really big aspect of our work, is to look at the indicators of disease risk for cardiovascular disease, but it also feeds into some of the other comorbidities like inflammatory bowel disease, and actually be able to show that beyond the immediate, there's wider physiological benefits for developing other conditions later on.
Yeah, that's huge, because it's comorbidities are very common, and the knock-on effects of long-term chronic inflammation, but equally the knock-on effects of reducing that inflammation is really important. So amazing. I guess the thing to ask now is, for those who are watching, if they want to get involved in any of your current work or future work, or if there's any way for people to kind of reach out, what's the best thing to do? What's next?
Well, as I mentioned, we've got a new PhD student, so a new research student who'll be with us for the next 3 years, who will be starting to run some more studies. So he will be running a study looking at the walking in people taking biologics. That'll be based in Leicester hospitals. So if anyone is watching who's in the Leicester hospital region, please let Dr. Morthy or any of your team know that you'll be interested in being involved, and we can pass on some information. That probably is going to start in the summertime. In the meantime, we will be trying to do something which is a bit more remote, something potentially questionnaire based, where we want to find out people's reasons for wanting to be more active. Because if we know why people want to be more active, what your motivation for being more active is, then we can help to tailor or design active interventions that will better serve what you want. And at the end of the day, you're the experts, and so we need your input. And so to get in touch or with us or find out more about that, NAS have been fantastic in helping us, and I might even ask Jamie to help us out with those sorts of things. So we'll certainly use NAS and Yoga for AS to advertise when that sort of questionnaire or that sort of study's out and available. But if you're interested in anything that we're doing, or if you've got any points that you want to share, then you can get in touch with us at Loughborough. at any time. So you can find us on the Loughborough University website.
Amazing. And I'm sure there will be lots more to come from not just this research, but all of the things you have down the line. And yeah, thank you both so much for your time, and really looking forward to seeing where things go next.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.